Hi everyone, I'm Amy, this is my wife Maggie, and together we are ThinkerThemer, and welcome back to our series 10, out of 10, where we're attempting to rate every game in our collection out of 10 games at a time.
Right, yes.
And the collection keeps getting bigger, so we may never finish this series.
We have successfully culled a couple of games.
We have, more than a couple actually. So let's get straight into it today. Why don't we start with one on your side?
Let's start with this teeny tiny little game that packs a good, real solid punch in terms of a game in a small box. This is Village Rails. So Village Rails, I love the tagline, is a game of locomotives, for obvious reasons, and local motives. Because what you're doing in Village Rails is you've got this little grid of, I think it's like 3x4 spaces for cards. And what we're going to be doing is creating these rail or train lines. But there's a couple of things that are going to be happening there. One, we're going to be trying to not just complete those rails, but making sure that the cards that we're going to be playing will have their own kind of scoring conditions within them. And some of them might give you points based on the types of terrain along that train line. Some of them might give you just points for the sake of it. Some of them might be a bit of like a set collection almost, or collect the same symbol a number of times. And the other element of that is that as you're collecting these or drafting these cards to play them down, you're also going to be banking trips, which are going to be the kind of local motives. And they're going to be the other additional things that are going to give you points that you're kind of banking on before you complete that line, obviously. And they're going to be placed either on top or to the left of whatever, that line is going to be.
Now this is actually a follow-up game to the game Village Green, so Village Rails. Both of them, the similarity is that they both take place in this 4x3 grid. One is trains, obviously, the other one is flowers. But I like this one because of the drafting mechanics. So it is that drafting mechanic whereby you have to place a coin on every previous card in order to take the one that you want. And that's really interesting because you are having to do that for pieces of track that you want to complete lines, and perhaps you want one that has a particular type of terrain. And then the scoring conditions, or those trains or trips or whatever they're called, the little locomotives that go at the start of one of the tracks, I really like that. You also have some scoring conditions that are going to give you money, and money is really important. So at the start of the game, you have a hand of cards, and for your first 3 tracks that you complete,
terminal cards, they call them.
Terminal cards thematically, but they're basically just another way of scoring that's going to give you some money, because at the beginning of the game, you really need to get that money engine happening. And at the end of the game, money is also your victory points, and so the person who has the most money will win. I really like this game. As Maggie said at the beginning, there's so much game in a tiny box. It's really thinky.
Yeah, very simple to teach as well. Like very easy and quick to pick up. Yeah.
Yeah, I just really enjoyed the puzzle element of it, because there's also these symbols along the tracks, and they're going to score, many different ways. And just thinking about how that interacts with the train cards and the scoring conditions that are on those as well. There's just a lot of things to think about.
Yeah.
And, everyone is going to finish off all their tracks. So there's a lot of satisfaction in being able to finish out the grid as well. So I've really enjoyed this one. I gave it a 7.6. And the only reason I didn't give it higher is just because it does, like, for a small game in a small box, it does run quite long, I thought. But the good thing about it is that if you're looking for more of that crunchy Euro feel, and, you're taking it with you traveling, or, if we were to take this with us at Christmas time, for example, it doesn't take up a lot of space, but it's really satisfying that, like, crunchier, heavier game.
And I love, like, multi-use cards. It's like, it's the same card that you would be using either, that places both the trips or the land, the different land types. So for me, it's actually a 7.7. I really enjoy this game. Again, it's very, it's not a thematic game. I guess it's a little bit thematic, but I don't care. Like, it's actually, I really enjoy it. I love how much thinkiness they've managed to capture into this.
Yeah, it was one of our most anticipated at Gen Con, and then we didn't manage to get our hands on it then, but I'm really glad that we did, and it will probably stay in our collection for a long time, because it's quite unique.
Yeah, just like Village Green. It holds a nice place in my heart.
Yeah, so that is Village Rails. The next game would go from a fairly new game to a much older game. This is For Sale, and For Sale is one of the most famous auction bidding games, because it's just so simple. the way that this game works. The game itself takes place over 2 phases. In the first phase, you are going to be bidding with money that you've started the game with on a number of property cards, and these properties have different values all the way from your lowly cardboard box through to some very
spaceship
out of futuristic house. But in the beginning of the game, in this first phase, you're going to be bidding and adding to the total every time if you want to continue bidding. And the first person who gives up and says, I don't want to bid anymore, they have to take the lowest value property from the pool. And then it continues like that. And as the people go out of the round, you're getting half of your money back. So you're basically saying, you know what, now I'm pretty happy that I'm next in turn order and I'll probably get that 10 there. So I'm happy to just pay half my money and not stay in and lose all of my money. The person who's the last person standing is of course going to get the highest value property, but they're also paying the full amount for it, so they don't get any money back. And then once we've done this, everyone has the same number of cards in their hand, and then we move into the second phase. So in the second phase, we're going to be drawing cards of a different type. These have money values depicted on them. And now we're all going to be simultaneously playing face down a property from our hand, the ones that we bid on earlier, and revealing them at the same time. And the person who has the highest property out of the lot that have been played are going to get first dibs on the money amount. So you want to, when you see that there's, a really juicy amount of money there and maybe only one of them and the rest are really low, maybe you want to take that, prize property, the really high value out of your hand and play it now. And basically, we do that until we play out all the cards in our hand, and then it's the person with the most money, either from that bidding process, that playing property cards process, or from not bidding all of their money in the first round, will be the winner.
Yeah.
And so it's so simple, and the two phases are really fun. There's just like this distinct shift in the energy of the game because you're setting yourself up in that first round and then you're playing it out in the second round. But even if you've got a hand of, some terrible cards in there, you always have that opportunity to wait until there's, cards that are all similar in value and so you don't mind playing, one of your cards because you're like, well, I'm just going to end up getting, the worst money amount, but that could actually be not too bad in the big scheme of things.
I quite enjoy this game. Well, I enjoy it because it's so light, it's so easy to teach, but it is quite fun. We all know how I feel about fun games. I don't tend to love fun games.
I feel like you don't love bidding games as well. As much.
It's things that I can humor them for a little bit. So it's one of those things, I'll play a game of it and then it's like I don't want to play it again or see it again for at least a few weeks, if not a few months, or until next Christmas or something like that.
I really do enjoy the game. I think it's really light and easy to teach, and it plays up to 6 players, which is always good because there's not always a lot of those. For me, the bidding element I could take or leave, I guess. But it's just
what do you mean you can take it? It's like the main point,
the game.
It's like that's the game.
In general.
That's
like mechanic. It's not my favorite mechanic.
Yeah.
And the whole game is based on that mechanic. I'm the same. I will always have it in our collection, I think. And I will happily teach it to anyone.
It's fun to play with the family, for example.
My mum is outrageously good at this game, and I'm really terrible at this game. So
you know, to seize the opportunity to kind of go, oh, how's this going to play out? Okay, well, and sometimes there's quite a lot of luck in it because you might have the best of cards, and then you have a crazy combination of money that comes out that you're like, the card, I played this sort of semi-powerful card and I thought I was going to get a lot of really, good money for it. And then someone else played one that was just a touch more valuable.
Well, that's the game.
And there was just a big gap between the cards. But it's so let's just say that, and maybe it's just because I'm not a good player of this game. It just feels very swingy, but that's part of its fun and charm.
Yeah, exactly. It is fun, and I gave it a 7.6. I just think it's light, accessible. It's one of those games I feel like most gamers would probably have in their collection. I really enjoyed. I will say we also have the automotive version of this, which we have are yet to play, so it was a reskin of this game, but I just keep going back to the classic. So
for me it's lower, but for obvious reasons. It's a 6.8 because I still think I think it's a really cute concept, but it's not it's not within my kind of player preferences. And it's I can humor it and I have a nice time with it, but then it's like, okay, I'm done.
Fair enough. But it's a classic.
It is a classic.
For sale.
For sale.
Yeah, and the next game
another little kind of classic.
Little light party game.
Yeah, point salad. So in point salad, we are getting points from getting lots of different veggie combinations and getting cards that give you points for different veggie type combinations. So it's a really abstract, even though there's very, very cute veggies on the cards. And I really, really love the aesthetic of this game. It's one of those things that for something that's fairly simple and it's just cards, I really am attracted to all the bright colors in it. But yeah, all you're really doing is you've got these 3 sort of stacks of veggies, and then they're going to be creating a bit of a grid of just like 2 cards for each stack, and you have it's very simple because all you have is the option of either getting 2 veggie cards, which are going to then become part of your, is that technically a tableau?
Yeah, your veggie tableau.
Yeah, your veggie patch, let's call it, or your veggie, I think you would have already harvested them, so let's call it your veggie storage.
That seems important.
This is relevant. This is very relevant to the gameplay. And then the other option is to get one of the scoring cards, which I love it. It's on the other side of the card, so multi-use cards. And so, yeah, that's essentially what it is. So it becomes a sort of interesting little balance between, if I see in the current spread, are they, veggies that I'm really invested in because they're gonna really help me with the scoring conditions I already have, or am I really interested now in one of the new scoring conditions that are there, and that's going to be the game changer? So that's essentially
but it's so great that that tension is so great because you need the vegetables to score, but then you also need scoring conditions to score more, and
for them to be meaningful.
Yeah, and so it's just like this choice that is so interesting every time it comes around to you. And then on top of that, the vegetables that other players need are public information as well. And so there's also this desire to hate draft as well, because the person next to you only wants carrots and all these carrots are in the market. And you're like, well, if I leave them there, they're just going to get this free draft of all those carrots. So maybe I should grab them. But carrots are worth negative points for me. So it's like, I just really enjoy this game. It is quick, light, but really easy for people to understand. Everyone, I think, is just like, okay, so I don't want onions and I do want capsicum, peppers.
And it's one of those games that I find that it's sometimes really difficult or near impossible to kind of really know who's doing really well until you do the counting up at the end and you're like, oh my goodness, they blew us out of the water with their scoring. So
but you always feel like you're in with a chance. Like you feel like you're doing really well, and then someone else triples your scoring. You're like, oh no, next time I'm going to go carrot strong.
Well,
but I really do like this game. It's also a game that I like for some reason. To me, it's a very summery game. I don't know if it's the vegetables, but I love sitting down at a picnic and playing this kind of game. Really outdoorsy kind of game, as long as it's not too windy. But anyway, that is Point Salad, and I gave it 7.7. It's fun, light, card drafting at its finest, just purely stripped back, and a little bit lower just because it's light and I can't play it all the time.
I feel so mean every time there's a fun game. I'm like, nope, not bound. It's a 6.6 for me.
Oh, come on!
I know, but it's like it's not. I know, but it's like it's just like we were talking before with.
Would you call it then?
Absolutely. I would call every fun game out of our library.
No, we are not culling. We are not culling. Put it down.
People coming down for do you have anything fun? It's like, no fun games at this house. We are only going to be playing strategy.
We are only going to be playing solo games by ourselves in different rooms. Yes. It's like Maggie's idea of a fun time.
Amazing. Yeah.
Our next game is another recent game that was released at Gen Con this year, called Dulce.
Yes.
And this is a game that's all about, cafes and sweet things. And ingredients.
And multi-use cards.
And
feeding your chicken.
And interestingly, in this game, you set it up Karuba style or bingo style, where you are basically one player is going to be creating a stack of randomized cards, and then they're going to be reading out which number everybody else should use as well. So you're all using the same cards in the same order, and you have a choice of what to do with those cards. In fact, you have 3 choices. The first choice is you can play it down into your little grid, which is essentially a farm where you're going to be manifesting, growing resources.
That's the best. I'm going to be manifesting some ingredients in my farm.
Think positively.
Yes.
Well, they kind of just pop out of nowhere. That's
they do. They sprout. kind of like when you harvest something.
But they don't grow smaller than large. They're just there. They're just there. Okay, so when you play your card down,
I'm on board with manifesting vegetables.
When you play your card down,
I don't even know what
the ingredients manifest.
Ingredients, yes.
And that is one way that you can use the cards. The cards also can overlay on top of each other in this kind of grid-like space. The other thing you can do with them is you can turn over the cards, and on the other side there is a cafe, and that cafe acts as a recipe fulfillment type objective where you want to harvest those ingredients and pay off this card in order to score victory points.
Make desserts.
Yes, and the third way you can use the card is you can not manifest things and not play it as a cafe. You can trash it, and if you trash it, you get to harvest an entire row or an entire column of ingredients from your farm, and then pay them to the different cafe spots. And that's essentially it. So what you're trying to do is optimize that resource generation and then paying off the recipe cards or adding more recipe cards in, because there's an important element, which is this flow-on effect of resources. So when you harvest a resource, for example, a peanut, it has different levels of, what is it called? Manufacturing.
Yeah, because then
processing.
Yeah.
Different levels of processing. And one cafe might require it in its more complex form. And then as you use it on that cafe, you get to move it if you've got another cafe spot that needs a smaller, more refined, less refined.
Yeah.
I'm not sure thematically
more
if it's
processed
more or
or
less.
like it's a byproduct. It's the byproducts technically.
Essentially, there's a flow-on effect where you can use it multiple times so long as the visual representation is getting smaller and smaller. So you're able to move it across. And that means that there is a little puzzle to optimize to make sure that before you harvest something or before you move it through that path, you've created enough cafes where they're nice and interconnected.
Yeah, you have an efficient flow of primary production and then secondary use and then tertiary use of your produce.
Yes.
Yeah.
So having said all that, this game for me is very fiddly because there are these tiny plastic cubes that represent all of the different types of ingredients, and they are also very similar in colour. And that drives me nuts because there's two colours in particular,
like
I think.
peanuts.
And when I look at them, I'm just like, what? I have to hold them up next to each other. That gets a bit frustrating for me. But then also, because you're constantly planting, moving them, then moving them along, and you're just like, okay, that goes there and that goes there and that goes. It's just fiddly. It's fiddly, and it's also incredibly multiplayer solitaire.
It is one of the most multiplayer solitaire games that I think I've ever played.
So there's no interaction between other players. You're simply trying to optimize the puzzle better than everybody else and have a better score at the end of the game. And for that reason, it goes against everything that I enjoy in gaming. And I gave this a 6. I'll play it if Maggie wants to play it. I am having an okay time, honestly.
That's interesting. Well, for me, look, I agree with a lot of the things that you've said. I love a multiplayer solitaire. I do agree. One of the issues is how similar the colors are. I kind of wish, and this is something that I could possibly ever do later as an upgrade of making those, instead of just colored cubes, making them into the actual little shapes of the things. So because it's like vanilla and coffee and peanut, and so that would be quite nice, but it is a very simple concept in the sense of there's only a couple of things that you can do, and then once you allocate it to those cafes, they score, and they just kind of score a point. But then when we didn't talk about any excess produce, so if something then didn't really get to be used, you can feed that to your chicken, and so your chicken becomes this other little kind of tracker that it's not giving you points, but you can move it. I believe it's three steps back to get an egg, which becomes a valuable wild resource that can help you kind of complete some of the other cafes. So, look, for me, I'm going to give it a 7. This is a game that I don't mind. I enjoy it. I really like the aesthetic of it. I like the aesthetic of the little the little cafes on it. I will agree that it is a bit fiddly because it's you're kind of balancing some of the cubes on top of cards that are on top of other cards, so it's very easy to bump. And the only reason I'm not kind of getting to score high is because it's very much a solo gamer kind of experience, and I enjoy it as a solo gamer. I don't know how often I would be pulling this off the shelf. I still would not cull it. So this is one of those games that come on. Sorry. This is staying. If those other party games are granted, they're classics. If they get to stay, this game gets to stay, at least for now.
I also say this game could be in half the size of the box.
It really could. It could take a leaf out of Village Rails book.
It really could. That also makes me annoyed. Anyway, I'll get over my
So is
annoyance.
Dulce.
I guess it's not going anywhere.
Not very Dulce in Amy's books.
Oh wait, there's this. Whatever. We'll mix up the order. The next one is Animal Kingdoms. Now, Animal Kingdoms has a fun spot in my heart because I was taught this by Monique and Naveen in person, which was lovely. They are lovely. But this is a really cool game, actually, and one that you don't often hear a lot about. And apparently it was on Kickstarter. I don't know if I was on Kickstarter at the time or completely missed it, but either way, in this game, there is a pentagon shape that sits in the middle, and each one of the sides has a different condition that allows you to put the cards in your hand down in front of it. So it will say only odd numbers, for example, and so you can only put odd numbered cards. Now, the cards in your hand represent different animals in the animal kingdom, and they all have different suits and different numbers. And so basically, on your turn, you want to be able to place one of those cards in each of the different areas. And the reason why you want to do this is because it's an area majority game. And so each of these little slices has this unique condition to put a card there. When you're able to put a card there, you also get to place a marker in this like pyramid structure of area majority, all of different sizes around the board. But what you're going to hope to have is the majority of tokens in this area so that you get more victory points.
Well, the points indicated for that round, for that section, which I'm thinking now is probably the kingdoms. You know, it's like animal kingdoms. I think each area is the kingdoms.
You're probably right, thematically.
We'll go with that.
And what's interesting, though, is there's one spot called, I think it's the capital, which is this little spot at the top of the pyramid. You cannot place there unless you're willing to, well, one, all of the spaces below it have to be taken, and once that is true, if you choose to go there, so towards the end of the round, you will have the opportunity to go there by placing a card down. You will be out of the round. So, but there's a benefit to going into that capital because it becomes a permanent token in that area for the subsequent round. So you're starting with some presence in that area. What I really like about this game is that the condition for each of those areas, i.e. which cards you can play down into that kingdom, changes from round to round. And there's so many different conditions and they all interact with each other. So sometimes they refer to the kingdom that's on the left or right so that there can't be matching cards, for example. And it's really straightforward, but the area majority element, it makes it really difficult to decide when to go out because you can also refresh the cards in your hand up until the point where someone decides to go out and then you can't anymore. So then you're stuck with the cards that are in your hand and you've got to play it out the best you can. So it's all about timing. It's all about watching what the other players are doing. Highly interactive for that reason. And that's why I really, really enjoy this game. How do you feel about this game?
I enjoy my time with it, but it is very abstract and it is very much about like I guess you kind of keeping an eye on, you know, the other thing is like every round the conditions for each one of those sections or those kingdoms changes. So it's like I kind of find that it's like, oh, you know, as I start to wrap my head around, okay, these other things that I'm wanting to do here and there, it's like, oh, new round, new whole set of conditions, and then you're like, oh, okay, what am I doing now again?
I like that.
Because
it's like hugely variable and every game feels really fresh because you're like, oh, I haven't seen this combination of things before.
I like that you're able to see the points that it's going to score each round. So then from the start of the game, you can start almost like deciding which are the kingdoms that I really want to have that sort of ongoing presence in potentially. I think I like it. Well, let's have a look at our scoring.
Okay.
Let's at our ratings.
Okay, my score was 7.8. I just think it's really accessible, but also that gamers are really going to enjoy this game as well. So I just think it's a really nice balance. It's really quick and easy to get to the table. Probably why it's one that Monique and Naveen decided to teach at a con, because it has that vibe to it. It's just fun, light, and interesting enough and tense enough with the other players. So I like it.
I think it's very clever. I give it a 7. So again, it's a game that I have a fine time. I enjoy.
Time.
I enjoy playing it, but it wouldn't be my first choice. I agree that it's very clever. Like there's a lot of things that it's got going for it, and it does lend itself to a lot of that replayability in the sense that no two games are going to feel exactly the same. But yeah, I think probably because it's sort of more of the abstract side. That's why it's not rating higher for me. Yeah,
that is Animal Kingdoms. So.
All right, we're going from this side. So this little one is called Remember Our Trip. And I feel like even though I picked it up, you should be the one talking about it because you love this game.
This is a game that is actually the theme that I love. Because it's such an abstract polyomino tile kind of laying game that could have been so boring. But the overlay of the theme is so good because around the table, you and your opponents, it is competitive. You've got on a trip together and you're trying to piece together your memories of this trip.
Cute.
And you all have a very different opinion of where that cafe was that you went to. I'm sure it was next to the park. Or that monument you went to see. And I just love the joy that brings to the table and the overlay of like the social banter because basically what you're doing is you are simply drafting a series of tokens and placing them onto a board in front of you that represents a city map of where you traveled to. However, in the center there's also another map which is the actual map and exactly how things were. But what's cool about it is it's dynamic in that the players are vying to create shapes. Once you've created a shape using the tokens you've been drafting, you get to claim a building or an element of memory that is a polyomino tile that you're going to place in the main board, and that locks it in as this is fact.
It becomes fact. You truly manifested that that memory into being.
It does. It appears
building out of nowhere, and the locals are like, "Where did this come from? This was not here."
But now that means
you remembered it, so therefore it is now.
That means now that all other players, if they want to score for that memory, they have to have the same tokens in front of them on their map as where I've just placed it on that map. And so it becomes this interesting puzzle of trying to race to create the real memories, but also trying to catch up and backfill the memories that everybody else has already accurately represented. And there's another little element that when you're drafting the tokens, there's always a card that tells you a rule as to the placement of those tiles, which makes it a little bit more difficult. I don't know, I just love the thing because, you know, these funny little Japanese games, they have such interesting themes.
Such an endearing theme. Like, it's just so darn adorable. Ah, and like as you're playing it, like the banter that just comes out of it.
You're like, no, I'm pretty sure that wasn't there.
Yeah, it's actually quite amusing.
It is.
It's quite entertaining.
Yeah, so I gave Remember Our Trip a 7.8, and I thought about this long and hard because I wanted to give it higher than 7.8, but for some reason it just does not get time off our shelf. So I love it every time I see it on our shelf. It brings me joy. It reminds me of this trip. It's Remember Our Trip, and I do remember my trip with the game. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like maybe it's sitting in a weird complexity versus ease of teach kind of space.
Yeah.
But if anyone wanted to play this, I would gladly grab it off the shelf and teach them because I find it really fun.
This is another one that's surprisingly high for me. This is a 7.5, but I think that's because I agree. Like, I love the theme of it. I love it just feels like when you're playing it, even though it's still competitive, it actually, I feel good. Like, I feel good. I feel kind of happy and joyous. Not fun. That's a different kind of emotion. But I have a really lovely time with it. And I also love how much color there is. So, like, the actual illustrations and, like, it's just, really nice.
It's quirky and lovely, and you have a cup of tea while you play it, and it's still competitive, but it's not aggressively competitive. It's like really, really nice. That is Remember Our Trip. And
should we go over
next?
here? Yeah. All right. Sure. So this one, oh boy. So this one is Crash Octopus. So in Crash Octopus, it's a dexterity game, meaning...
Another game from Japan too.
Yeah, another game from Japan that has excellent table presence. I will give them that. When you put because there's this sort of, there's this octopus in the middle of the table, and the area that's delineated by this string essentially around that creates a little kind of circle area. And there's just going to be debris debris or treasures spread out everywhere in this sea. And you see the little tentacles as well of the octopus, and it's so creative how they've managed to convey this octopus in the middle of the ocean with these wooden components on a flat table.
Yeah.
Love that bit.
And the way that you set it up is you just drop all of the other components on top of the octopus head. And they just, because it's got this curvature, it's just like, poof, and they just go everywhere. Yeah.
So we're all going to have our own little boat, and our aim is just going to try and flick. So we all have our little flag, and we're going to try and flick those treasures onto our boat and try and collect one of every different type of treasure. Along the way, however, some things will happen. One of them could be some of our treasure could be knocked out of the boat, which then means that we no longer have it and we have to kind of get it back. And then there's also going to be like a battle-ish type moment or rounds that are going to create a bit of chaos.
But did you talk about the flicking?
Well, I mentioned it, but I don't know how much. What else?
Because everybody has this little flag.
Yes.
And the beauty of the flicking is that you're flicking a piece of debris. In order to put it onto your boat, you've got to flick it and hit your boat. Yeah. But you also don't want the pieces on your boat that are currently on your boat to fall off, because that's a disaster and you've got to start again.
Yes.
And then if you're anything like our family, you will turn on each other and start to attempt to knock things off other people's
free-for-all
boats
of destruction and trying to just like forget about your own collection of things, just as long as no one else gets anything.
But the fun thing with the dropping pieces onto the head of the octopus is that there's also this piece and that you're dropping onto the head to try and knock stuff off your opponent's boats. But you can, throughout the game, move that head. So you can move it really close, aggressively close to another player in an attempt to, hope that they get wiped out. Or you can also move the tentacles around too. And sometimes that helps you protect your own boat by placing it in front of your boat to try and obscure yourself. But I agree, it has great table presence. And however, I would also say that this is the only dexterity game in our collection.
This is true.
The only one.
Will it continue to be? Let's see, what's our rating? What's our scoring for this?
You go first.
My rating for this is a 6 because 1, fun, and 2, dexterity. I just don't gel with dexterity games.
You don't.
It's again, I can really appreciate the aesthetics of it. I love how they've managed to create that table presence with all those cute little wooden components. But no, even though there's lots of laughter when you're playing as well, and I think it's an excellent kind of family game, it's not my thing. Yeah.
Look, I gave it a 6.9, and I feel the same way. I mean, I love it. It's beautiful. I love the quirkiness of Japanese board games, and for that reason, I definitely want to hang on to it, so don't get any ideas.
Okay.
And it's also the only dexterity game in our collection. Dexterity games not usually for me either, but at least there's one. So if someone wants to just knock things over or test out their, flicking skills, I feel like you and I are not very good at these games. But other people are very good at these games.
Yeah. It's like I'm not very good at them, but I also don't have a big investment in becoming better at them. Like, some people are like, oh yeah, I'm gonna figure out the right. I'm like, no, not my thing.
Yeah. Anyway, that is Crash Octopus. And I'm gonna keep it.
Okay, we're keeping it. We're keeping it.
All
right.
The next game is a much bigger experience. This is, it's heavy. Uwe Rosenberg's Hallertau.
It's a whole community center in there.
Yeah, so in this game, what's the most interesting, compelling part of this game is this community center. And this community center starts on one side of a board, and you are going to be pushing it to try and push it all the way to the other end of the board.
Well, we're all collectively, in theory, trying to help contribute to the building. So the actual physical movement of this, I thought it was like a reconstruction of it, but I think historically what actually happened was they actually physically needed to move the community. So we're all individually in our own little player boards having a representation of how much we individually are helping. Sorry, you carry on.
No, but I think what's most interesting about this community center is it has a little window cut out of it. And the window shows a number of workers that you are going to have every round. And at the beginning of the game, you only get 6 workers. And these 6, so there's a number 6 in the window. And as you push the community center up, it's going to get higher and higher, that number, which means that the more effort you put into pushing this community center up the hill, I assume it's a hill, the more
there are
workers,
boulders, so
the more workers you're going to get to play with, because this is a worker placement game. But the interesting thing is that in order to move the community center, there are boulders and there are resources that you need to move these tiles along so that you can clear an entire column, which will allow that community center to move up one column. And in order to do that, you are playing this other puzzle, which is where you are harvesting, growing and harvesting different types of grain and resources so that you can pay the cost to move the community center. The other interesting element of this game is that every round, though the number of resources you need get more and more and more in order to move that community center. So the pressure is on from the beginning, and you really need to get into this production of all of these different types of resources. So the way you're going to do that is use these workers to play out on this board that has this scaling system of worker placement, where if you're the first person to go there, it's cheaper, and if you're the second person to go there, it gets more expensive, and so on and so forth. And you're going to go out there in order to tend to your fields. And the fields are really interesting in the way that they work, because there's a weird calculation system that the higher the field is, you basically get a higher number of resources. So you only have a single meeple, vegetable meeple, grain meeple, that represents that good. And then as soon as you harvest it, that moves into a box that represents the number of those that you have. And then when you want to plant them, you need to remove one of them or move it down, lose one of them.
It's like an abacus, almost like accounting type thing. Old school accounting. I don't know if that's actually how they did it, but I imagine that's a very effective way of keeping track of things.
What means that you don't need hundreds of meeples in order to keep track of all of this, but basically you're spending those goods to move your community center, or hope to. And then there's all of these side things that you can get done, including having sheep, and sheep have special resources that you can't get from the fields, like milk, like wool. And then also there's this other element, as a lot of Uwe games have, of card play. So there are cards that you have in your hand that are going to give you endgame scoring, ongoing benefits, and these interesting game state conditions that if you can make it true what is depicted on the card, as in the current game state, you get to cash that card in. So there's an interesting sequence of playing the cards. It's just one big efficiency puzzle. And our experience with this game, I feel like, it's changed over time.
Yeah, it did. We sort of got to a point where we played it out, I guess, in a way. We sort of got to that, we hit that point where then for it to feel fresh and different, or get more into the nuance, it really then becomes about the card play. And I'm not very good at card play, and it can be very swingy as well, because it's basically very much down to the luck of the cards that you end up getting.
Yes, and so I think actually when we first started playing it, that community center and working out how to build an engine such that you could move it from one end to the other, super cool and interesting. I really enjoyed our time with doing that, and the fact that it was always a close race and we were both just like, oh no, you've moved yours further than mine. And if you get to the end, there's a whole lot of victory points associated with that too. And so that puzzle I really enjoyed my time with. But as Maggie and I both leveled up and we both became great at that engine building element, it meant that the only difference between winning and losing was to do with the cards. And because there's luck involved in drawing the right cards, and cards that really combo well together,
synergize together quite well
with what you're doing.
And
sometimes you pick up a card and you're like, oh great, that game state is already done, here you go. And that felt a little bit unfair or luck driven. And so for that reason, the game kind of, it just petered out for us. I think we probably played it 10 to 12 times, and then we were just like, no, I think we're done. And then I was meant to sell it and I didn't, so
it's still here.
It's still here. And so Hallertau, I actually gave it 7.6. I think that it is a great design, but it wears out.
I agree. So mine's very similar. I'm a 7.7 with this one, because again, I can appreciate everything that went into the design, and I think there's so many really interesting mechanically the components, and even physically the mechanical thing of this whole community center moving along with all these little barriers. So I enjoyed the discovery of that in the cracking of that core puzzle. But then once we reach that, then it's
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, it's sort of, now we're ready to kind of move it on. So
Yeah.
I still think it's a solid game, particularly for the earlier part
Maybe
of it.
we'll come back to it one day when it
I
doesn't
don't know.
feel
I
so
know
much like rinse and repeat.
It's more that I know that I'm not good at card play, like and
Yeah.
the whole kind of reading and optimizing for cards, and so I know that it's never going to be, it's never going to overtake other Uwe games.
No,
that I
it's
love.
not. So that is Hallertau.
Yeah.
And next
All
game
right, the
is
next
a
one?
big one.
Oh, a big one. My
Which
father's work.
We actually covered on Rado's channel, but we have never covered on ours.
Yeah.
And so this is my father's work. I backed it on Kickstarter, and it's a fairly recent game. This game, well, the reason why I backed it was because it's a combination of narrative
Yes.
and Euro-style worker placement.
Yeah. So in my father's work, we are undertaking our father's work essentially over 3 generations. So we start the game with a sheet from one of our father's journals depicting their work, or the main thing that they wanted to create, some kind of experiment or some kind of invention. And so then it's up to us to see if we can work our way through 3 generations to get to a point where we can actually make it happen. That we're not locked into that. Essentially what's going to happen is over the course of these 3 generations, we're going to be unveiling a particular story based on different campaigns. So it comes with different kind of campaign boxes, and they have all sorts of, they go on all sorts of different narrative paths, and there's going to be a whole heap of different components that you'll never even get to use in a lot of your games for each one of those campaigns. But ultimately what's going to be happening is we're going to be trying to collect different resources, sending out either our spouse or servants or our, what do they call it, the housekeepers or the people groundskeepers. So to create and collect a lot of different elements that we're going to be using or ingredients that then we're going to be using to run experiments. And ultimately those experiments are also going to have points, but there's going to be other ways of collecting points. But it's really all about kind of having a bit of a play with whatever key component is happening in the story and your interaction with that story, which will change depending on the campaign. But then the other main thing is going to be these experiments, which have this dependency on, so, if there's level A, B, C, and then your father's work is a level D, you need to have, in order, before you can do a B experiment, you need to have done an A experiment. Before doing a C experiment, you need to do an A and 2 Bs. And so it becomes increasingly more difficult, but also along the way, you're going to be collecting knowledge. So storing or recording knowledge in all these different areas. I mean, it's like science or like biology and chemistry and things like that, which are all going to reference different experiments.
And you have to store that knowledge because between generations you lose everything. I mean, you get to keep a couple of things, but you lose all your money, all your resources, and pretty much all of those completed experiments. You get to keep one by default, which means that if you are working your way up to that really difficult father's work, you better be storing some resources because it is really tight in order to be efficient enough to get that work done throughout the course of the game. There were many games where I didn't get it done. It's quite difficult.
And you don't have to get it done. So it's a lot of points if you do get it done, but you could decide, no, I actually don't. I want to avoid it, and I can get my points.
Because it's in the title, I feel like I need to do it.
I don't think I've ever, of all the games that I've played with, I don't think I've ever managed to make...
Oh, really?
My father's work. I don't think I've ever done it. Anyways, but you do get to keep all the upgrades that you do to your estate. So everything that you upgrade, which makes sense, because that tends to be the real estate. Any real estate that you can leave to your offspring is the thing that remains.
The interesting thing about this game is it is app driven, so you do need to play with an app at the center of this game. It's going to prompt you that when certain things happen in the game, you need to pick up the iPad or whatever you're using and read the next part of the story. It might give you a decision. It might ask you to pass it to a player specifically, so pass this to Maggie, and Maggie gets to read something in private and then make a decision on her own, which we might find out the outcome of later in the story. Now, I think this was incredibly ambitious, this game.
Indeed.
It definitely took what I think is a very good worker placement game.
Solid core worker placement puzzle.
It's a great game. In fact, it has this book of worker placement spots that change as the story evolves. I really liked that element of it.
Map of the town that evolves and, new buildings are added. And
and I also like the fact that you have different worker types and they have restrictions on what they can and can't do, which makes the puzzle a little bit more challenging. and the fact that you're trying to build up all these different experiments. So I really liked that core game. And then over on top of that is trying to make it feel more immersive, trying to feel like there are 3 distinct campaigns that add this like layer of story.
And also like managing the level of like the angry mob, like are you attracted too much attention, and then that's going to then limit your ability. If you get overtaken by the mob, then you're not going to be able to go into town and things like that, or keep your sanity as you're becoming a bit too obsessed with your experiments. So a lot of different levers.
So very ambitious, but was it successfully? I would say partially.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, somewhat.
Somewhat. And the thing that I didn't like about the game is the amount of verbose writing.
A lot of narrative, a lot of text that I didn't feel like particularly served to move the story forward. It's like if it was all really story-rich stuff, great, but a lot of it was just like going on and on and on in circles, not really saying anything when using very, very complex words that are not sort of part of the everyday language.
We jokingly said put the thesaurus down because that's what it felt like. It felt like unnecessarily complex story that wasn't saying anything. Like if you wanted to summarize it for the people around the table because you couldn't be bothered reading out 2 whole pages of text, even then sometimes it was like, well, there's not much that happens. Like, really, let's just move on to the next screen. And it was disappointing because the topics were quite good, and the part where it finally did get to a decision and it impacted the map, it impacted the things that the players got to do or the punishments that the players had. I really liked when it added in a new objective. So it's like in this round, you really need to collect this resource or else there'll be trouble ahead, and you kind of know then, oh, I better do a little bit of that. I like those elements, but the story itself, it really wasn't for me. I tried, and we tried super hard to get into it as well. We read it out. We were trying to be, very true to reading it out. And the app only reads out a random 1 page generally at the start, and you've got to drive the rest of it yourself.
A lot of reading. And again, I wouldn't mind the reading if it was like stuff that's moving the story along, but a lot of it wasn't. So
it wasn't the best writing, and there were elements in it that unfortunately were a little bit like needed a trigger warning or something. Like there was some odd directions that some of the topics took and didn't need to go there. But anyway, My Father's Work, I gave it 7.4. Again, ambitious project. I like what they did with the integration of some elements. I really like the base game actually without the story.
The core game itself is quite good.
And the components are
beautiful. The production of this is just
stunning.
It is really truly stunning, and like it makes you excited when you're like the tactile element of it and just the aesthetic of it, and like for example all the animal meeples are all unique, all the the different gears, and even the coffins are all kind of unique. But so for me it's actually a 7.5 because again I appreciate that core game and I love the aesthetic of it, but I feel like it would be way higher if the story and the narrative element of it had been stronger in terms of actual things that are changing the story dramatically and moving things along.
Yeah, also a one and done for me. Like now that we've played through each of the campaigns, and there's 3 campaigns, I'm ready to move this on to another household.
Even though every campaign, once you finish it, it actually unlocks new endings, and there's elements that you haven't even touched. So there's going to be, but I don't feel like those elements ever added that much. And sometimes it's like they were kind of almost inconsequential. So
I know I'll have to go through the same story again in elements. So
the core story doesn't change pretty much.
And the last game for today's episode is a cooperative game, which I feel like I've been saying more and more on this channel. That the word cooperative game. Anyway, they're sneaking in now.
They really are.
But this game is Décorum, or Décorum, if you like, because this game is, I love the tagline of this game, a game of passive-aggressive cohabitation, and that is exactly what it is.
Well encapsulated,
Because in this game, you are going to be trying to decorate a house together, and you both have different ideas about what you want to put in this house. And at the beginning of each...
Very set in your ways in terms of your objective by the end of this decoration stint.
So at the start of every what scenario, you are both going to be given a card, and you represent 2 different players that are living together. And it says on there the rules of that you, as that character, want to make true in the house. The way you want to have the house decorated.
Be fulfilled.
Yeah, the other player has no no idea what those requirements are, but you are going to be passively aggressively changing the decor in the house, repainting the walls until you can both reach consensus that this is the way that the house should be set up and therefore win the scenario. And the way it plays out is really interesting because on your turn, you can simply there's a whole heap of decorations that are different styles and different colors. And you can choose to, for example, put a lamp in this room and take out a different lamp, for example, because I want to change the color of the lamp. Or you can choose to repaint a wall. You might just want to change the color there. Or you can simply just remove something out of the house. And then you're going to say, how do you feel about that? And the other player is going to say, I feel rubbish about that. I love that lamp. That was my
I was very attached to
favorite
that
lamp.
Yeah.
And you've ruined the house.
Yeah.
And they can't tell you why that is the case, but they can certainly tell you whether they're happy or sad about the decision. So in another example, I might have removed a lamp and Maggie would be like, you know what, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I didn't like the lamp anyway.
I'll be like, if anything, I think that makes everything better.
Yeah, I think it's actually better now.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of talking in circles about what you want and don't want for this house. You're trying to guess what the other player has as their requirements, because sometimes it just ends up in this push and pull where I'm like, no, I want that lamp. No, I don't want that lamp. I want, and they're like, okay, one of us needs to work out a different way to achieve our objective.
Yeah.
And the different scenarios in the box, they get, I think there's 20 that come in this box itself, and you kind of go through them one by one, and they get harder and harder in difficulty. And to the point where there maybe is only one way that this house is going to work, given the complexity of the different requirements you both have. And so it gets more challenging. And of course, you are also counting along the way how long it's taking you.
How many rounds? Because there's a set number of rounds within which you'd have to do it. Or ideally, obviously, the fewest number of rounds.
Yeah, but when you, after a certain number of rounds, you're going to get a clue where you might be able to tell them one of your conditions that you're trying to meet. And so the game, I like that about the game. It doesn't feel too punishing because it's difficult, but it gives you enough like clues that you feel like it's achievable.
Yeah.
And you feel good. And most of the time you're going to progress to the next scenario.
Yeah.
I really like that. Until you have like, you know, just one disastrous round and it's like, oh, how are we ever going to achieve that together? But yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it's like, 'cause as you're playing through it, you're like, oh my goodness, like we have such clearly opposite almost. And like to the point sometimes you're like, are we even gonna get to do this? Because it seems like we have like conflicting objectives, and you never do. Like there is a way to solve every single scenario.
Yeah.
But so clever. It's a very, very clever way of implementing, and very thematically like makes
super
sense.
Thematic. So I did not expect that from this game. It feels like a really abstract puzzle that could have been anything. You're just trying to meet two separate lists of conditions that neither of you have full awareness over.
Beautiful.
But the theme and the fact that the theme makes it more about the social interaction with the other people. This game, I should say, is 2 to 4 players, but it feels like it was made for 2 players. And I've only mainly played it 2 players. I played all the way through the ones in the box with Maggie, but then I played it with another friend, and I wondered if it would translate, because Maggie and I are obviously a couple, and so there's a certain dynamic, and it was hilarious.
A lot of passive aggressiveness that we have in our daily lives.
There's lots of things that now we need to unpack. No, but I played it with a friend, and the same thing happened. So, you know, I was just talking to him about, you know, how we can express what we like and don't like, and we were laughing so much.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's not really, I don't even really know if this is passive aggressiveness, because it's just like aggressive. It's just like, it's not like going, I don't know if that looks so good over there. It's like, I hate that. So it's like, that's just aggressive. But yeah, what rating did you give Décorum?
I gave Décorum 8. And it's a cooperative game, which I normally don't enjoy. But this one, I just love the theme. I do think it is passive aggressive. I find that really amusing. And I love that it's about decor. I mean, what a great theme.
I gave this a 7.8, which is I think my highest.
High.
Yeah, this is my highest rating for this whole episode.
Wow.
And it's a co-op. And it's the actual gameplay of it is fairly abstract.
I don't think you enjoyed it that much. I felt like I was trying to force you to continue.
I think, like, for me, it's just that it's like I just have to kind of do like the applause, the like slow clap, like build up, because it's just such a clever way of using a theme in a really purposeful way that works very well, and it creates really, really nice table banter as part of the whole negotiation.
Yeah.
Is it something I'm going to be like pulling out of the shelf again and again? No, that's why it's not higher.
No,
but it's still like,
Yeah, I think I'd want to play it with someone new and then play it through all the levels again, because it has a really nice, like, layered layers of increasing difficulty.
Yeah.
Also has some secret envelopes that you open that adds new elements to the game along the way. And then there's also an app that generates new scenarios for you if you wanted to. But everything that's in the box is really great. Anyway. I really enjoyed this.
You can also upgrade to
turning into a cooperative channel.
No, what is happening to us? This is I blame you. I blame all of you out there kind of going, what, try this one. What about this one? What about, and I was going, maybe. And now look what's happened.
Maybe we're just getting nicer and less competitive in our older age.
I don't know.
Maybe.
It was pretty competitive, even though we were trying to do the same thing. It's like, no, what are you doing? It's like,
anyway, that is 10 more games on 10, out of 10. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please hit like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll be back with more board game content soon. But otherwise, bye for now.
Bye.